What happens when a bright student ditches his textbooks for flashing lights and wild parties? Joshua had dreams of success, but the thrill of nightlife pulled him into a dangerous spiral, skipping classes, failing exams, and risking everything. Just when he thought he had it all under control, reality struck hard, and the consequences were shocking. What will his fate be? Stick around, because this story will leave you speechless. Joshua had always been the golden boy of Hopefield High School, with his sharp mind and an even sharper focus on his dream of becoming an engineer. Teachers praised him, and his mother wore her pride like a badge of honor. But none of that mattered when the night fell, and the city lights flickered like an invitation to another world, one that promised adventure, freedom, and a thrill that no math equation could ever provide. It all started with Daniel. Unlike Joshua, Daniel had never cared much for school. He had a way of making recklessness seem fun, a way of making Joshua believe that life wasn't meant to be lived buried in textbooks. "Bro, you need to loosen up," Daniel grinned one evening as they walked home. "All this school stress will kill you before you even get to university." Joshua chuckled, shaking his head. "And what's your grand solution? Party all night and fail?" "Not fail, my guy. Just enjoy life a little. Come out tonight, just once. If you don't like it, I won't bug you again." Joshua hesitated. He had never been to a club before. His mother would never approve, and the thought of sneaking out sent a thrill of anxiety through his veins. But at the same time, the idea of breaking free, even for a night, excited him. One night wouldn't hurt, right? That night, as his mother dozed off in the living room, Joshua quietly slipped out the back door, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect. But as he followed Daniel through the neon-lit streets, he felt something stir inside him. The night had a pulse, a rhythm that called to him like a forbidden song. And for the first time, Joshua was ready to listen. The moment Joshua stepped into the club, he felt like he had entered another world. The pounding bass, the flashing neon lights, the scent of sweat and expensive cologne, it was intoxicating. He had seen clubs and movies, but nothing compared to the real thing. People swayed to the rhythm of the music, lost in the moment, while waiters balanced trays of colorful drinks that sparkled under the dim lights. "Welcome to freedom, my guy," Daniel shouted over the music, slapping Joshua on the back. Joshua's heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was excitement. He watched as Daniel moved with ease, dapping up familiar faces and slipping seamlessly into the crowd. Then, before Joshua could protest, a girl with long braids and a confident smirk handed him a drink. "First time?" she asked, eyeing him curiously. Joshua hesitated. He wasn't supposed to drink. His mother had warned him about it countless times. But Daniel was already knocking his back, laughing like he had no worries in the world. What was the harm in one sip? The first taste was bitter, burning his throat, but it wasn't as bad as he had expected. He took another sip, and then another. Before long, the room seemed to spin, but instead of fear, all he felt was a strange kind of lightness. He was laughing, dancing, enjoying himself in a way he never had before. For the first time in a long time, school, responsibilities, and expectations felt like a distant memory. The night passed in a blur, and before he knew it, the sun was creeping over the horizon. Panic set in. His mother would be waking up soon. His uniform was still lying untouched on his chair, and he had a test that morning. "Relax, bro," Daniel said lazily as they stumbled out of the club. "You can't kill yourself over school. Just skip today." Joshua hesitated. Skip school? That wasn't him. He never missed a day. But as exhaustion settled over him like a heavy blanket, he realized he was too tired to even think. Maybe Daniel was right. One missed day wouldn't ruin his future, would it? Joshua had never skipped school before, but that morning, he collapsed onto his bed without a second thought. His head pounded, his mouth was dry, and the last thing he wanted was to face a math test with a splitting headache. He barely heard his mother knocking on his door. "Joshua, you're going to be late for school," he groaned, forcing his voice to sound weak. "I'm not feeling well, Mama. Maybe I'll rest for a few hours and go later." A heavy silence followed. His mother wasn't easily fooled, but after a few seconds, he heard her sigh. "All right, but if you're not better by noon, we're going to the hospital." The thought of seeing a doctor sent a jolt of panic through him, but exhaustion won, and he drifted into sleep. By the time he woke up, it was afternoon. He checked his phone, 6 missed calls from Daniel. He also had a message from his best friend. "Daniel, you missed a crazy night. Bro, we're doing it again today. Don't flop." Joshua hesitated. Last night had been fun, but his body was still recovering. Besides, missing one day of school was risky enough. He couldn't make it a habit. But just as he was about to ignore the message, another one came in. "Daniel, come on. You're a big boy now. School will always be there, but youth doesn't last forever." A slow smile crept onto Joshua's lips. Maybe Daniel was right. He had spent years being the responsible one, the student everyone expected to be great. But for the first time, he felt like he was living. That night, he sneaked out again. This time, he was more prepared. He dressed sharper, walked with more confidence, and when he stepped into the club, he didn't hesitate before taking a drink. The guilt that had gnawed at him the previous night was gone. In its place was a thrill, a dangerous, intoxicating thrill. The problem was, thrills never lasted. As the nights out became more frequent, the lies multiplied. He learned to set alarms to wake up just in time to pretend he was getting ready for school. He started forging notes to explain his absences. When teachers questioned his sudden lack of focus, he blamed stress. It worked for a while until the day his mother found his school report. Joshua was in his room, scrolling through his phone when he heard her voice, sharp and accusing. "Joshua, get in here." His stomach dropped. Slowly, he stepped into the living room, where she stood, holding the paper like it was a betrayal. "What is this?" she demanded, shaking the report in his face. Joshua swallowed hard. His grades had plummeted, where once there had been A's and BS. Now there were Dis and F's. He had promised himself he would keep things under control, but reality was catching up. "I can explain," he stammered, but his mother's eyes were filled with something worse than anger. Disappointment. That hurt more than anything. Joshua had faced his mother's anger before, but this was different. She wasn't shouting, wasn't throwing accusations. She simply stood there, staring at him with an expression so heavy with disappointment that it made his chest tighten. "You can explain," she repeated, her voice quieter now, but sharp enough to cut through his lies. "Then explain, Joshua. Explain why my son, who once had a future brighter than gold, is failing his classes." Joshua opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? That he had been sneaking out every night, that he had chosen parties over school. He had told so many lies that even he wasn't sure where to start. His silence was enough of an answer. His mother exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't even recognize you anymore." The words stung. He had expected shouting, maybe even a slap. But this quiet disappointment was worse. "I just got overwhelmed," he finally muttered, hoping she would believe it. "School has been stressful, and Stress." She cut in, eyes narrowing. "You think I don't know stress? I raised you alone, Joshua. Worked day and night to make sure you had everything. And now you're throwing it all away." Joshua looked down, guilt gnawing at him. He hated seeing her like this. Hated knowing he was the reason for that pain in her voice. But before he could try again to salvage the situation, she shook her head. "No more. You're grounded. No phone, no going out. You will focus on your studies, and I will personally make sure of it." Panic shot through Joshua's veins. No phone, no going out. That meant no parties, no nightlife, no freedom. "Mama, please." "No, Joshua." Her voice was final. You've lost my trust, and you will earn it back." He wanted to argue, to promise he would do better, but he knew his mother. Once her mind was made up, there was no changing it. That night, as he lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, frustration bubbling inside him. He should have been at the club with Daniel, laughing, drinking, feeling alive. Instead, he was trapped in his room like a prisoner. Then, his phone vibrated under his pillow. A message from Daniel. "Daniel, heard what happened? Tough luck, bro. But don't let her lock you up. Sneak out. One more night won't hurt." Joshua hesitated, his mother's words still ringing in his ears. But then he thought about the music, the lights, the thrill of the night. One more night wouldn't hurt, right? Joshua sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the message from Daniel. His mother's words echoed in his head, but so did the memory of the club, the rush, the energy, the freedom. One more night. That's all it would be. Just one more. His heartbeat quickened as he tiptoed to his bedroom door, listening carefully. The house was silent. His mother had gone to bed early after the exhausting confrontation. Slowly, he unlocked the window and slipped out, landing softly on the grass below. His heart pounded with adrenaline as he crept past the gate and into the night. Daniel was waiting at the street corner, smirking. "You wouldn't stay locked up?" Joshua forced a grin, ignoring the nagging guilt at the back of his mind. "You really thought I'd miss out?" They made their way to the club, but something felt different this time. The excitement was there, but it was tinged with something darker, rebellion. The knowledge that he was actively going against his mother's wishes made it feel riskier, more dangerous. The club was even more alive than before. The music throbbed through his veins. The flashing lights painted his world in shades of red and blue, and the drinks flowed freely. Joshua drowned himself in the moment, pushing away thoughts of school, of home, of consequences. Then came the mistake. A guy Joshua had never seen before approached their table, sliding a small packet into Daniel's hand. Joshua frowned. "What's that?" Daniel chuckled, shaking the packet. "Just something to make the night better." Joshua hesitated. "You mean drugs?" Daniel rolled his eyes. "Relax, it's nothing heavy. Just something to keep you awake, make the night more fun." Joshua's pulse quickened. This was dangerous territory. Sneaking out was one thing, but this? He knew better. His mother's voice screamed in his head, reminding him of all the lessons she had drilled into him. But then Daniel nudged him. "Come on, bro. Don't be scared. You're already here. Might as well live it up." Joshua looked around the club, the flashing lights making everything feel unreal. The old Joshua would have walked away, but the old Joshua had already broken so many rules. What was one more? He reached for the packet, and just like that, he crossed another line. The moment the pill slid down Joshua's throat, a new kind of energy surged through his body. The music became sharper, the lights brighter, and every movement felt weightless. He was invincible, unstoppable. Laughter spilled from his lips as he and Daniel danced without a care in the world. But what felt like an escape soon spiraled into something else. His heartbeat sped up unnaturally. His palms turned clammy, and the room seemed to tilt. At first, he thought it was just the effect of the drug. But then everything started to blur. His thoughts raced too fast to control, and suddenly, standing felt like a struggle. "Yo, Josh, you good?" Daniel's voice sounded distant, almost distorted. I don't know," Joshua stammered, his body trembling. Panic gripped him as the walls of the club seemed to close in. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. Something was wrong. He stumbled forward, knocking over a table. People turned to stare, some laughing, others frowning in irritation. The music kept pounding, but all Joshua could hear was the deafening thud of his own heartbeat. "Bro, sit down," Daniel said, grabbing his arm, but Joshua jerked away. He needed air. He needed to get out. He barely made it to the club entrance before his stomach lurched. Falling to his knees, he vomited violently onto the pavement. The world spun, his vision darkening at the edges. He could hear voices, concerned, annoyed, but they all blended into meaningless noise. Then, a strong hand grabbed his arm. Joshua. That voice. That familiar, firm voice that cut through the haze like a knife. His blood ran cold. He forced his head up, his vision swimming. But there was no mistaking who stood over him. His mother. Terror gripped him as he saw the fury and heartbreak in her eyes. This wasn't just disappointment. This was betrayal. His world, the double life he had tried so hard to balance, came crashing down in that moment. And this time, there was no escape. Joshua wished the ground would open and swallow him. His mother's eyes burned with a mix of rage and sorrow, her face frozen in disbelief. The flashing club lights made the moment feel surreal, but the weight of reality pressed down hard. Get up! Her voice was low, controlled, but he could hear the fire beneath it. Joshua's legs felt like jelly. His body was still under the drug's influence, his mind foggy. But the sheer force of his mother's presence jolted him into motion. He staggered to his feet, but as soon as he tried to speak, another wave of nausea hit him. His mother stepped back in disgust. Look at you. Look at what you've become. Daniel, still standing nearby, tried to intervene. Ma'am, please, don't you dare ma'am me. She snapped, her sharp glare cutting through Daniel like a blade. You and your friends have turned my son into a stranger. Joshua had never seen his mother this furious. Her voice, usually full of warmth, was now ice cold. He opened his mouth to explain, to beg, but she raised a hand. Not a word. Without another glance at Daniel or the club, she grabbed Joshua by the arm and dragged him away. He barely had the strength to resist. The ride home was suffocating. The silence was worse than any shouting. Joshua's mind raced with 1,000 excuses, but none would be enough. He knew he had gone too far. When they got home, she locked the door behind them and turned to face him. Sit! Joshua sank onto the couch, his hands trembling. His mother took a deep breath, as if trying to contain the storm raging inside her. I have worked too hard, suffered too much. For you to throw your life away like this? She began, her voice shaking. All this time, I thought I was raising a responsible young man. But I was wrong. Mama, I said not a word. She thundered, slamming her hand against the table. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Do you know how I found you? She continued. One of your teachers called me. Your grades have collapsed. They said you've been missing school. Then I started investigating and asking questions from students in your school to friends around the neighborhood. Then I met a boy who told me he had seen you sneaking out in the middle of the night with that good-for-nothing friend of yours. I told him to do some findings. He did and gave me the information of the ongoing circumstance. So I came looking for you, my own son, only to find you at a nightclub, drugged, drunk, and throwing up like a street rat. Joshua dropped his head into his hands, shame crushing him. I didn't raise you to be like this, she whispered. I didn't sacrifice everything for you to destroy yourself. The silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less firm. You are grounded indefinitely. No phone, no friends, no stepping outside except for school. And if your grades don't improve, I will send you to live with your uncle in the village. Maybe hard labor will teach you what I clearly failed to. Joshua's heart sank. His uncle's village had no electricity, no nightlife, no distractions, just work, discipline, and endless chores. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a wake-up call. For the first time, fear settled deep in Joshua's bones. His life was spiraling, and he was on the verge of losing everything. But was it too late to fix it? The next morning, Joshua woke up with a pounding headache and a sinking feeling in his chest. His mother's words from the night before still echoed in his mind. No phone, no friends, no freedom. He rolled over and reached under his pillow out of habit. But there was nothing there. His phone was gone. His mother must have taken it while he was asleep. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. his body still felt sluggish from the effects of the drug, and the guilt pressed down on him like a weight. He had always thought he could control it, juggle school and nightlife without consequence. But now everything was crumbling. Dragging himself out of the bed, he shuffled into the living room. His mother sat at the dining table, flipping through the pages of his report card. Her face was unreadable, but the silence was suffocating. Without looking up, she said, "Eat your food, then get dressed. We're going to your school." Joshua's stomach twisted. He had been avoiding the consequences of his actions for too long, but now there was no escape. The walk to school felt like a funeral procession. Joshua could feel his mother's disappointment hanging in the air, heavy and unforgiving. When they arrived, she marched straight to the principal's office, her grip on his wrist firm. The principal, a stern man with thick glasses, frowned as they entered. "Mrs. Okafor, Joshua." He gestured for them to sit. Joshua stared at the floor, unable to meet the man's gaze. His mother spoke first. "Tell me, sir, how bad is it?" The principal sighed and slid a file across the desk. "Joshua has been missing classes, failing tests, and hanging around the wrong crowd. We've given him warnings, but nothing has changed. If this continues, he may have to repeat the year." His mother inhaled sharply. Joshua's heart sank. Repeating a grade? That had never been part of his plans. The principal continued, his tone more disappointed than angry. "Joshua, you had so much potential. You were one of our top students. What happened?" Joshua's throat tightened. What could he say? That he had traded his future for flashing lights and temporary thrills. That he had let his best friend lead him into ruin. His mother's voice broke through his thoughts. "What are our options?" The principal adjusted his glasses. "There's still time for him to recover, but it will take serious effort. No distractions, no skipping classes. He needs to prove that he deserves another chance." His mother nodded, then turned to Joshua. "Did you hear that? You have one last chance to fix this. But if you fail again," her voice lowered, filled with warning, "you're going to the village." Joshua swallowed hard. The principal leaned forward. "It's up to you now, Joshua. What's it going to be?" Joshua hesitated. A part of him wanted to fight back, to defend himself. But deep down, he knew they were right. Taking a deep breath, he finally whispered, "I'll fix it." His mother didn't respond right away. She just studied his face, searching for any trace of sincerity. "Good," she finally said, "because this is your last chance." As they left the office, Joshua felt the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. He had made promises before, but this time, failure wasn't an option. Would he really be able to turn things around? Or was he already too far gone? Joshua sat alone in his room, staring at the blank pages of his notebook. The weight of his mother's words, the principal's disappointment, and his own shame pressed heavily on him. He had promised to fix things, but where was he supposed to start? His grades were a mess, his reputation at school was ruined, and the thought of sitting through class, while everyone whispered about his downfall, made his stomach turn. He picked up his pen, determined to study, but the words on the page blurred together. A knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. His mother stepped inside, holding a plate of food. "Eat," she said simply, placing it on the table. Joshua hesitated. She was still angry. He could feel it. But instead of yelling, she just stood there, watching him. After a long silence, she sighed. "Joshua, I won't lie to you. I'm still hurt, but I haven't given up on you." His throat tightened. "I know I messed up, Mama." She nodded. "Yes, you did. But now I want to see actions, not words. No more excuses." She left before he could respond, but her words stayed with him. Actions, not words. The next day at school was worse than he expected. The moment he walked into class, whispers spread like wildfire. "Isn't that the club boy? I heard he almost got expelled. Serves him right." Joshua, keeping his head down as he took his seat. He could feel the judgment, the stares, the amusement in some of their voices. Even the teacher gave him a long, disapproving glance before starting the lesson. For the first time, he felt truly alone. But as the day went on, he noticed something else. While most of his classmates whispered and mocked, a few faces didn't. His old study partner, Tolu, didn't look at him with disgust. A girl named Amina even gave him a small nod. And then, after class, someone tapped his shoulder. "Hey, man," said a quiet voice. It was Felix, one of the top students in school. "If you need help catching up, let me know." Joshua blinked in surprise. You're willing to help me?" Felix shrugged. "Everyone makes mistakes. The real question is, do you actually want to change?" Joshua hesitated, then nodded. "I do." Felix studied him for a moment, then handed him a notebook. "Then start with this. It's everything we've covered in the past month. Go through it, and I'll test you tomorrow." Joshua took the notebook, feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. This was his chance, his last chance. But could he really turn things around? As he walked home that evening, a message from an unknown number popped up on his mother's confiscated phone, which she had left charging on the table. "Daniel, yo, bro, where have you been? We're planning something big this weekend. You in?" Joshua stared at the message, his heart pounding. This was it, the decision that would define his future. Would he choose the path of redemption? Joshua's fingers hovered over the phone screen, his heart pounding. Daniel's message stared back at him. "Yo, bro, where have you been? We're planning something big this weekend. You in?" A few weeks ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have rushed to get ready, excitement coursing through his veins at the thought of another wild night. But now, things were different. His mother's voice echoed in his head. Actions, not words. Felix's question rang through his mind. "Do you actually want to change?" Joshua shut his eyes, inhaling deeply. He could already picture the consequences of his decision. If he went, he'd fall right back into the cycle. More trouble, more disappointment, and eventually exile to the village. But if he didn't go, he would lose Daniel and the so-called friends who had encouraged his downfall. He would be left to rebuild his life alone. His fingers trembled as he typed his response. "Joshua, I'm out. Bro, I can't do this anymore." He hit send before he could change his mind. Immediately, the typing bubbles appeared. Then, Daniel's response came. "Daniel, what? Bro, stop playing. It's just one night." Joshua, "Nah, man, I need to fix my life. No more clubs. No more failing." The typing bubbles appeared again, then stopped. A few seconds later, Daniel replied, "Daniel, suit yourself. Guess you're too scared to have fun now. Your loss." Joshua stared at the screen. Just like that, Daniel had dismissed him. His chest tightened, but instead of sadness, he felt something else, relief. He placed the phone face down on the table and picked up the notebook Felix had given him. This was his new choice, his new life. Days turned into weeks, and Joshua poured himself into his studies. It wasn't easy. His mind still craved the thrill of nightlife, and the whispers of his classmates didn't disappear overnight. But he pushed through. Felix held him accountable, testing him every day. His teachers, once skeptical, began to notice the effort he was putting in. Even his mother, though still cautious, started believing in him again. The turning point came when he received his latest test results. As he unfolded the paper, his heart pounded. He scanned the page, and then his breath caught. 73%. Not perfect, but a vast improvement from his failing grades. His mother, standing over his shoulder, let out a shaky breath. "You're getting there?" she murmured, pulling him into a tight hug. For the first time in a long while, Joshua felt hope. One evening, as he packed his books, he received another message. But this time, it wasn't from Daniel. "Felix, proud of you. Man, I told you you could do this." Joshua smiled. He had almost lost himself to the world of nightlife. But now he had found something greater, purpose. His journey wasn't over, but one thing was clear. He had chosen the right path, and he wasn't looking back. Joshua's story is a powerful reminder that every choice we make shapes our future. No matter how far you've gone down the wrong path, it's never too late to turn back. Have you ever faced a tough decision between fun and responsibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love stories that make you think, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we have even more mind-blowing content coming your way. Don't miss out. Love you all.